The silence in my house had a weight to it. For 3 years, it had been my most constant companion, a heavy blanket woven from routine and resignation. It settled in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light and pooled in the corners of rooms I rarely entered. My life was a series of quiet, predictable loops. Wake, work at my drafting table, eat alone, sleep. And for 3 years, the rotting porch on the front of the house served as a perfect, decaying monument to my own inertia. I knew it was a problem. I saw it every time I forced myself to go out for groceries. The way the third step sagged with a groan, the splintered railing leaning at a precarious angle. It was a physical manifestation of the neglect I'd allowed to seep into every part of my life since Michael left. Fixing it felt like too much effort. Admitting something was broken felt like too much effort. Then, one rainy Tuesday, the universe decided my time for passive observation was over. I was rushing to bring in a package left on the stoop, my mind on a deadline, when my foot went straight through the third step. Not just a sag, but a clean, splintering break. I caught myself on the doorframe, heart hammering against my ribs, ankle screaming in protest. A spray of damp, rotten wood clung to my jeans. That was it. The final push. My neighbor, a kind, gossipy woman named Carol, had been recommending the same contractor for months. "Julian," she'd said, her voice full of a reverence usually reserved for local celebrities. "He's an artist with wood. And so reliable." I'd always nodded and promised to call, then promptly let the thought dissolve. This time, clutching my throbbing ankle, I limped inside and found his number on the scrap of paper she'd given me. He agreed to come by the next afternoon. I spent the morning in a state of low-grade anxiety, cleaning up the entryway, as if he were a date and not a man I was paying to fix my mess. When the doorbell rang, the sound was jarring in the quiet house. I opened the door, and there he was. Carol hadn't been wrong. He was, in a purely objective sense, a striking man, taller than I expected, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and a stillness that was immediately calming. He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way a model is, but his features were strong, defined. A square jaw, a straight nose, and eyes the color of dark moss. They were steady, unreadable. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and work pants, both dusted with a fine layer of what looked like sawdust. The scent of fresh-cut pine and something else, something clean and masculine, like soap and sunshine, clung to him. "Julian," he said. His voice was a surprise, low and smooth, with a slight gravelly edge that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. It was a voice that didn't need to be raised to command attention. "Leo," I managed, stepping back. "Thanks for coming." He nodded, his gaze sweeping past me to the disaster of the porch. He stepped outside without a word, his boots making a solid, reassuring sound on the sound planks. I followed, feeling flimsy and insubstantial in his wake. He crouched down, running a hand over the splintered hole where I'd fallen through. His hands were large, fingers long and calloused, but his touch on the wood was surprisingly gentle, almost diagnostic. "The rot's gone deeper than the steps," he said, looking at the main supports. "The whole structure needs to be rebuilt. Joists, decking, everything." He said it simply, a statement of fact, but I felt a flush of shame, as if he'd just diagnosed a personal failing. He looked up at me then, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not judgment, maybe understanding, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that steady, professional calm. "I can draw up a quote for you," he said, standing up. He was close enough that I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes. "Have it for you by tomorrow." I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. He gave another small, curt nod and turned to leave. I watched him walk to his truck, his stride long and confident. He didn't look back. The silence he left behind felt different now. It wasn't just empty. It was expectant. Work began the following Monday. The first sound I heard that morning wasn't my alarm, but the low rumble of Julian's truck pulling into my driveway. It became the new sound of my mornings. The careful, rhythmic thud of a hammer, the high-pitched whine of a saw, the soft scrape of a shovel against dirt. My house, which had been a silent sanctuary of solitude, was now filled with the sounds of methodical destruction and creation. My drafting table faced the front window, a fact I had never given much thought to before. Now, it was a front-row seat. I told myself I needed the light. I told myself I was just keeping an eye on the progress. But I was watching him. I watched the way he worked. There was an economy to his movements, a fluid grace that was mesmerizing. No wasted energy, no hesitation. He'd lift heavy beams of lumber as if they were nothing, his muscles flexing under the thin fabric of his shirt. He'd measure a cut with intense concentration, his brow furrowed slightly, a small line appearing between his dark eyebrows. I started to learn the landscape of his body, the strong column of his neck, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape when it was damp with sweat, the sharp line of his jaw when he was focused. My own work suffered. I'd find myself staring out the window for long stretches, a pencil held loosely in my hand, my mind a million miles away from the architectural renderings I was supposed to be finishing. I was cataloging details. The way he'd pause around midday, leaning against his truck to drink from a silver canteen, tipping his head back so I could see the line of his throat. The faint, satisfied smile that would touch his lips after a particularly difficult piece was set perfectly in place. I started analyzing every brief interaction we had. A nod in the morning as I collected my mail felt charged with unspoken meaning. Was his gaze lingering a second too long? Was that a real smile, or just politeness? I was an archaeologist excavating a forgotten city, treating every glance and gesture like a precious artifact to be studied. "Need you to pick a stain color," he said one afternoon, startling me. I hadn't heard him approach the window. I looked up from my sketchbook, where I'd been idly drawing the shape of his hands, and felt a hot blush creep up my neck. "Oh, right." I fumbled with the clasp on the window, pushing it open. The air that rushed in was thick with the scent of him, sawdust and sweat, and that clean, sun-warmed smell. It was intoxicating. He held up 2 small pieces of wood, each stained a different shade of brown. Cedar or redwood. I stared at the wood, but all I could see were his hands. The clean, short nails, the network of fine lines and scars on his knuckles. I felt like I couldn't breathe properly. The redwood, I think." "Good choice," he said, his voice that low, smooth rumble. His eyes met mine over the wood samples. They were so dark, so deep. I felt pinned by his gaze, completely exposed. He held it for a beat too long, and then he smiled. A small, genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. My heart did a painful little flip in my chest. That was it. Just a smile. But it felt like a seismic event. The small touches started a few days later. They were so minor, so fleeting, that I could have convinced myself I imagined them. The first time, I was bringing him a glass of iced tea. It was a sweltering afternoon, and he looked flushed from the heat. As I passed him the glass, our fingers brushed. A spark, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He didn't react, just took the glass and murmured his thanks, his eyes on the half-finished deck. But I saw the slight tightening of his jaw. The second time was less ambiguous. He'd stacked a pile of new lumber near the front door, and I needed to get by. "Excuse me," I said, trying to squeeze past. "Here," he said, his voice close to my ear. He placed a hand on the small of my back to steady me as I navigated the obstacle. His hand was large and warm, the heat of it seeping through my thin t-shirt, branding my skin. It was a simple, practical gesture, a courtesy, but it wasn't. His fingers pressed, just for a second, a moment of deliberate pressure before he let go. He didn't move his hand away immediately. It lingered, a breath of a touch that sent my thoughts scattering like startled birds. I hurried inside, my back tingling where his hand had been, my mind racing. He was just being helpful. He was just being polite. He was not just being helpful. He was not just being polite. The internal debate raged, a frantic, hopeful, terrified monologue. The breakthrough came on a Thursday. The sky had been a hazy, oppressive gray all day, the air thick and still with the promise of a storm. Julian had been working to pour the concrete footings for the new support posts, a race against the weather. I watched from the window, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach on his behalf. Just as he smoothed the last of the wet concrete, the sky opened up. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a deluge. A violent, wind-whipped downpour that turned the world outside my window into a churning, watery blur. "The concrete!" I yelled, though he couldn't possibly hear me. I saw him look up at the sky, then at his work, a curse forming on his lips. He ran to his truck and started wrestling with a massive, heavy blue tarp. He was strong, but the wind was stronger, catching the tarp like a sail and nearly pulling him off his feet. Without thinking, I was out the door and in the rain. "I'll help," I shouted over the roar of the storm. The rain was instantly blinding, plastering my hair to my forehead and soaking my clothes in seconds. He looked at me, surprised, then nodded, a grateful look in his eyes. "Grab that end." We fought the wind together. It was a chaotic, clumsy ballet of pulling and stumbling. The tarp whipped and snapped, and the rain fell in cold, hard sheets. At one point, a gust of wind caught my corner and sent me staggering backward. Julian's hand shot out, grabbing my arm, his grip like iron, steadying me. In that moment, soaked and struggling, we were a team. The world narrowed to just the two of us, the wind, the rain, and the shared, desperate goal of saving the concrete. Finally, we managed to wrestle the tarp into place, weighing it down with bricks and leftover lumber. We stood there for a moment, panting, drenched to the bone, looking at our handiwork. A wild, exhilarated energy crackled between us. I looked at Julian, his face dripping, his dark hair plastered to his skull, and I started to laugh. A real, uninhibited laugh that came from deep in my chest. He looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Come on," he said, his voice loud against the storm. "Let's get out of this." He led the way to the side door of my garage, a space I usually only used for storage. We dripped all over the concrete floor, shivering slightly as the adrenaline wore off. The sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof was a deafening, intimate roar. "I'll make some coffee," I said, my teeth chattering. "Wait here." When I came back with 2 steaming mugs, he had taken off his soaked work shirt and was using it to dry his hair. My eyes snagged on the sight of his bare torso. He wasn't chiseled like a fitness model. He was solid, real. Broad, powerful shoulders, a dusting of dark hair across his chest that tapered down to his waist. The muscles in his back and arms were clearly defined, cords of strength earned through hard, physical labor. I felt my cheeks heat and quickly looked away, handing him a mug. "Thanks," he said, his voice softer now in the relative quiet of the garage. We drank in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the drumming of the rain. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was comfortable, companionable. The shared crisis had washed away the last of the pretense between us. "You know," he said, staring into his mug, "I used to have a desk job, wore a tie every day." I looked at him, surprised. I couldn't imagine him confined to an office. "Hated it," he continued, a wry twist to his lips. "Felt like I was suffocating. Like none of it was real." He looked around the garage, at the tools and the scent of oil and metal. "This is real. Building something with your hands. Fixing what's broken." He looked at me then, his moss green eyes searching my face. "What about you? Your art. Is it real for you?" The question was so direct, so personal, it caught me off guard. No one had asked me that before. Not even Michael. They asked if it paid well, or what I was working on. Never if it felt real. "It is," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's the only thing that is, sometimes." He nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his gaze. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't have to. In that quiet, rain-lashed garage, surrounded by the smell of wet earth and coffee, something shifted. The wall I had so carefully constructed around myself had a crack in it. And Julian was the one who had put it there. The days that followed the storm were different. The air between us was still charged, but the tension was softer now, less anxious and more anticipatory. We fell into an easy rhythm. I'd bring him coffee in the morning, and we'd talk for a few minutes before he started work. He'd ask about my illustrations, and I'd ask about the porch. The conversations were simple, but they felt like more. They felt like the careful construction of a bridge across the space that separated us. He was working on the railings, the final piece of the project. I was at my desk, trying to focus, but my gaze kept drifting to the window. He was using a hand chisel to carve a decorative notch into the top of a post, his movements precise and focused. I was admiring the steady control of his hands when it happened. A moment of distraction, a bee buzzing too close to his face. His hand slipped. I saw the flash of steel, heard his sharp intake of breath, and saw the dark line of red well up on his forearm. It wasn't a small cut. It was deep, angry, and bleeding profusely. I was on my feet and out the door before I even registered making the decision. "Julian." He was clutching his arm, his face pale under his tan. Blood was dripping from between his fingers, staining the new wood of the porch. "It's fine," he said, his voice tight with pain. "Just a slip." "It is not fine," I insisted, my voice shaking slightly. "That needs to be cleaned. Now, come inside." He looked like he was about to argue, the stubborn set of his jaw returning. But then he looked at my face, and whatever he saw there made him relent. He nodded, letting me lead him into the house, into my kitchen. It felt surreal, having him in my space like this, wounded and vulnerable. He left a small trail of red droplets on my linoleum floor. "Sit," I commanded, pointing to a kitchen chair. I've never been a commanding person, but the adrenaline made me bold. I grabbed my first aid kit from under the sink, my hands trembling as I opened it. He sat, still clutching his arm, watching me with those unreadable eyes. I pulled another chair up so I was sitting opposite him, our knees almost touching. The room felt incredibly small. All I could hear was the frantic beat of my own heart and the sound of his measured, slightly ragged breathing. The air was thick with the coppery scent of his blood. "This might sting," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. I took his arm gently, turning it over to inspect the wound. His skin was warm, dusted with fine, dark hairs. The cut was clean but deep. I had to get the bleeding to stop. I took a sterile gauze pad and pressed it firmly against the gash. He flinched, a sharp hiss of breath escaping his lips, but he didn't pull away. My other hand rested on his forearm to steady it. I was hyper-aware of everything. The solid muscle under my palm, the heat of his skin, the way his fingers curled slightly as I applied pressure. I could feel the steady, strong pulse beneath my fingertips. I kept my eyes fixed on the task, on the blood seeping into the white gauze, because if I looked at his face, I knew I would fall apart. After a minute, the bleeding slowed. I carefully lifted the pad. "Okay," I whispered. "Now to clean it." I picked up an antiseptic wipe, the crinkle of the foil packet deafeningly loud in the silence. I leaned in, concentrating, my face only inches from his arm. I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I could smell the sawdust in his hair. I gently dabbed at the edges of the wound. My hand was shaking. I was trying so hard to be gentle, to not cause him more pain. He was so still, so quiet. I risked a glance up at him. He wasn't looking at the cut. He was looking at me. His gaze was intense, dark, and unwavering. It held none of the professional distance he usually maintained. It was raw. My breath hitched. My focus shattered. There was only the charged space between us, the scent of antiseptic and blood, and his eyes. His eyes, fixed on mine. Closer. His voice was a low rumble, a vibration I felt in my bones. It was rough, thick with something I couldn't name. "I'm losing my mind." Did he just say that? My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. Closer? Why? I leaned forward, my mind scrambling for a logical reason. He must want me to see the cut better. Maybe there's a splinter I missed. Yes, that's it. That has to be it. I inched forward, my face now just a few inches from his. I can see the flecks of green and gold in his dark eyes. I can feel his breath on my cheek. The world narrows to this single, terrifying, exhilarating point in time. His eyes flickered down to my lips, then back to my eyes. A universe of meaning passes between us in that one look. This isn't about the cut. This was never about the cut. "Better," he whispers, the word a ghost of a sound. And then he closes the small distance between us. His lips meet mine. It's not a tentative kiss. It's firm, sure, a statement of intent. It's a question and an answer all at once. For a second, I'm frozen in shock, and then my body responds before my brain can catch up. I lean into him, my hand dropping the antiseptic wipe to the floor as my fingers tangle in the thick hair at the back of his neck. The kiss deepens. It's not rushed or frantic. It's methodical, deliberate, like the way he works. It tastes of the coffee I made him that morning, of the storm we'd weathered together, of sawdust, and something that is purely, intoxicatingly Julian. It's the most honest thing I have ever felt. He is fixing what's broken, and what's broken is me. When we finally break apart, we're both breathless. He doesn't move away. He rests his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His uninjured hand comes up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture is so tender it makes my chest ache. We stay like that for a long moment, just breathing each other in. No words are needed. The silence that fills my kitchen is no longer heavy with loneliness. It's full of him. It's full of a possibility so bright it scares me. He stayed. I finished cleaning and bandaging his arm, my movements far steadier now, as if the kiss had grounded me. He didn't go back to work. We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. He helped me make a simple dinner of pasta and salad, his presence in my kitchen feeling startlingly natural. Later, we sat on the couch, and he pulled me against his side, his good arm wrapped around my shoulders. I fell asleep there, lulled by the steady rise and fall of his chest. He carried me to bed, and I remember the feeling of his strong arms around me, the scent of his skin as he tucked the covers around me before lying down beside me, fully clothed. We just held each other, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone in the dark. I woke to an empty bed. The morning light was filtering through the blinds, and the space beside me was cool. A cold, familiar panic seized me. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and loneliness. He was gone. He regretted it. He'd packed his tools and left, and I would be left with just the memory of a kiss and a finished porch. I threw on a t-shirt and hurried downstairs, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I looked in the kitchen. Empty. I peered out the front door. His truck was still in the driveway. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. He was on the porch. The new, perfect porch. He was sitting on the top step, a mug of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. The silence between the house and the porch felt like a chasm. I made my own coffee, my hands shaking again, and went out to join him. I sat down a careful distance away, not sure of the rules. He didn't look at me at first, just kept his gaze fixed on the horizon. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. My anxiety returned, a knot twisting in my gut. Finally, he turned his head, his expression serious, his eyes searching mine. "I wasn't planning on that yesterday," he said, his voice quiet. My stomach dropped. Here it comes. The apology. The "let's forget this happened." But, he continued, holding my gaze. "I'm not sorry it happened." He reached across the space between us and took my hand. His palm was warm and rough against mine, his grip firm, grounding. Not at all. The knot in my stomach dissolved, replaced by a warm, spreading wave of relief. I squeezed his hand, unable to speak, a stupid, happy grin spreading across my face. We sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Just then, Carol's front door opened, and she emerged to get her morning paper. She saw us immediately. Her eyes widened, taking in the scene. The two of us sitting close on the steps, our hands intertwined. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and sharp, undisguised curiosity. It was a small thing, a neighbor's glance, but it felt like the first test. The outside world intruding on our fragile, new reality. I felt a reflexive urge to pull my hand away, to create distance. But Julian didn't flinch. He didn't let go. He simply tightened his grip on my hand and gave Carol a polite, firm nod. A silent, unambiguous declaration. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't ashamed. He was claiming this. He was claiming me. In that moment, watching him defy the world with a simple nod, I felt a surge of love for him so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. The porch was finished that afternoon. He hammered in the last nail, checked the last board, and packed the last of his tools into his truck. The finality of it hung in the air. The job was done. The reason for him to be here every day was gone. I stood on the porch, the solid wood beneath my feet, and handed him the final check. It was the most awkward transaction of my life. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling horribly inadequate. "It's perfect." "You're welcome, Leo," he said, his eyes soft. He folded the check and put it in his pocket. He lingered for a moment, and then he walked to his truck. My familiar loneliness began to creep back in, a cold fog at the edges of my newfound warmth. This was it, the end of the story. He opened the truck door, threw his toolbox in, and then he stopped. He stood there for a long moment, his back to me. Then he closed the door and turned around. He walked back up the steps until he was standing right in front of me. "The porch is done," he said, his voice low and steady. "But I'm not." My breath caught in my throat. "I want to take you to dinner tonight," he said. "A real date. Not as a client. Not as your contractor." He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, his calloused fingers gentle against my skin. "What do you say?" "Yes," I said, the word rushing out of me on a wave of pure joy. "Yes." A week later, Julian is in my kitchen again. He isn't here to fix anything. He's here because he wants to be. He's chopping vegetables for the dinner we're making together, his movements as sure and competent with a knife as they are with a hammer. The evening sun streams through the window, catching the silver in the new bandage on his arm. The house is filled with the scent of garlic and basil, and the sound of his low voice as he tells me about his day. The silence is gone. The weight is gone. My home, which for so long felt like a shell I was hiding in, now feels alive. It feels full. I watch his hands, the same hands that tore down the old and built up the new, the same hands that held mine on the porch steps as the sun came up. He looks up and catches me staring, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. It's a smile I know now, a smile that reaches his eyes and makes me feel seen. For years, I was an observer of my own life, watching it decay from a safe distance. I thought I needed to fix the house, but the house was never the problem. The whole time, it was me who was broken. And Julian, with his quiet strength and his steady gaze and his surprising, life-altering kiss, didn't just rebuild my porch. He showed me how to start rebuilding myself. He laid a new foundation. And standing here, in my kitchen, watching the man I am falling in love with make us dinner, I feel a quiet, profound sense of peace. It feels like I've come home.